Good morning, class. I hope you've learnt your Beasts of England and made a summary of Old Major's speech. Well, today in college we had a staff meeting that you all might be allowed to come from the 1st of December. You'll get a notice specifically, but we've been told to get ready for you in college. So it'll be really nice to see all of you and as many of you as can come. So today we'll move on to chapter 2 of Animal Farm. So in chapter 1, we hear Major giving a speech trying to lay the foundation of the need for animals to rebel because men are treating them unkindly. Then he tells them his dream of a wonderful land where there are no more humans and there's enough food for all. And then he teaches them a song, Beasts of England, and every animal, lowing, barking, quacking, neighing, they all learn to sing it. And they make such a lot of noise that Mr. Jones thinks that a fox has entered the barn, and so he fires a shot and they all go to sleep quickly. So now this is chapter 2. 3 nights later, old Major died peacefully in his sleep. His body was buried at the foot of the orchard, near the lower end of it. This was early in March. During the next 3 months, there was much secret activity. Major's speech had given to the more intelligent animals on the farm a completely new outlook on life. They did not know when the rebellion predicted by Major would take place, but they had no reason for thinking that it would be within their own lifetime. But they saw clearly that it was their duty to prepare for it. Now, as far as the animals are concerned, okay, wow, we are being exploited. Till now, they thought that is their life, to lay eggs or to give milk or to produce babies that will be sold. But they said, okay, we are being exploited, so we must be careful, we must get ready for this rebellion. The work of teaching and organizing the others fell naturally upon the pigs, who were generally recognized as being the cleverest of animals. Now, this word pig-headed means very strong-headed, and sometimes you're as dirty as a pig, you say, he's a pig. Pigs are never referred to as very smart animals, but in this novel, George Orwell has selected the pigs to be presented as the most intelligent, and not that they are intelligent, that they were recognized. People thought them to be intelligent. Eminent among the pigs were 2 young boars. I've told you before, BOARS stands for male pigs, Snowball and Napoleon. If you're reading from a book, underline these 2 names. You're going to meet these pigs later on, whom Mr. Jones was breeding up for sale. Napoleon was a large, rather fierce-looking Berkshire boar, the only Berkshire on the farm, not much of a talker, but with a reputation for getting his own way. So, even in these few lines, he's trying to give you a character. He didn't talk much, but if he wanted to have something done or he wanted to do something, he did it. So he is a man of action and few words. Snowball was a more vivacious, talkative, full of life pig than Napoleon, quicker in speech and more inventive, but was not considered to have the same depth of character. Unfortunately, when we talk a lot, people think we don't have much character, and they're subtly making a difference, S-U-B-T-L-Y. Without saying anything that one is good and one is bad, they're saying one can do a lot of work, one is very active, very creative, but not such a sound character. All the other male pigs on the farm were porkers. The best known among them was a small, fat pig named Squealer, and underline his name, you will find him to the end of the book, with very round cheeks, twinkling eyes, nimble movements, and a shrill voice. He was a brilliant talker and when he was arguing some difficult point, he had a way of skipping from side to side and whisking his tail, which was somehow very persuasive. The others said to Squealer that he could turn black into white. So for Squealer, they've given 2, 4, 5, 6 lines. That he's another pig, quite active, brilliant talker, someone who's very persuasive, who can convince you, make you change your mind, persuade you. And he had this habit of changing, jumping from one side to the other, and you kept looking at him, and finally you agreed with him, even on wrong points. He could turn black into white, very, very dangerous. These three had elaborated old Major's teachings into a complete system of thought to which they gave the name of animalism. So now Major gave some ideas, and these animals, the pigs on the farm, Napoleon and Snowball and Squealer and some others, they managed to call it animalism. Several nights a week, after Mr. Jones was asleep, they held secret meetings in the barn and expounded the principles of animalism to others. Expounded? Explained. At the beginning, they met with such stupidity and apathy. Apathy is indifference. Some of you haven't joined up the class yet. Some of you have computers and laptops and phones, but you're not listening. You don't stay for the whole class. Okay, it's okay, I'll read it. Even the style of reading tomorrow, when you want to read with expression, then you have some model for you. Okay, how should I read? How should I make my audience listen? So apathy is indifference. Whether in all areas of life we have people who are indifferent to the result of their work, the impact of their work or their personality, and they don't act. And stupidity, of course, you all know that they wouldn't understand. Some of the animals talked of the duty of loyalty to Mr. Jones, whom they referred to as Master, or made elementary remarks such as, Mr. Jones feeds us, if he were gone, we should starve to death. Others asked such questions, why should we care what happens after we are dead? Or if this rebellion is to happen anyway, what difference does it make whether we work for it or not? And the pigs had great difficulty in making them see that this was contrary to the spirit of animalism. Now, once the story is over, I hope to point out the similarities between the story and communism. When communism came, it was one for all and all for one, and everything to be shared in common. But slowly it degenerated into some having a lot and many having nothing. So the animals said, now what does it matter? They were only animals, just like humans. Vote kyun kare? Mask kyun pehne? Why do we keep social distancing? Why do we worry about all these things? The stupidest questions of all were asked by Molly, the white mare. Mare, M-A-R-E, a female horse. The very first question she asked Snowball was, will there still be sugar after the rebellion? She loved sugar. No, said Fondy. We have no means of making sugar on this farm. Besides, you do not need sugar. You will have all the oats and hay you want. You'll get food. Why will you get sugar? And shall I still be allowed to wear ribbons in my mane? Comrade, said Snowball, those ribbons that you are so devoted to are the badge of slavery. Can you not understand that liberty is worth more than these ribbons? So she was vain. She loved her sugar. She loved her ribbons. And she could not see beyond that. Molly agreed, but she did not sound very convinced. When you like something very, very much, you don't want to give it up. The pigs had an even harder struggle to counteract the lies put about by Moses. Now underline the tame raven, underline Moses' name. Moses, who was Mr. Jones' special pet, was a spy and a talebearer. But he was also a clever talker. Now imagine the crow bearing tales to Mr. Jones. But these details we don't notice. They've called him a tale bearer, but he was a big talker. He claimed to know of the existence of a mysterious country called Sugar Candy Mountain, to which all animals went when they died. It was situated somewhere up in the sky, a little distance beyond the clouds, Moses said. In Sugar Candy Mountain, it was Sunday 7 days a week. Sunday, as I told you last time, Sunday was a day of rest, and the Christians could not work on that day. They were supposed to be resting, praying, thinking, reflecting, whatever. So even they did not make the animals do any major work, like whether they did not do any harvesting or plowing, or didn't take the animals out to graze or whatever. It was Sunday 7 days a week. You'll be resting. Clover was in season all the round, and clover was a kind of leaf growing on a bush that some animals liked. They said you'll have clover all the year round. And lump sugar and linseed cake grew on the hedges. The animals hated Moses because he told tales and did not work, but some of them believed in Sugar Candy Mountain, and the pigs had to argue very hard to persuade them that there was no such place. Now you write Moses in the margin also, underline Moses. We'll find a different story about Moses much later at the end of the book. So Moses is talking about heaven, that there's a heaven. So not to worry. So for a long time, whether it was Christians or people from all other faiths, they trusted in their scriptures, and sometimes they were content with their lot in life. They did not wish to improve it or change it, because that was God's will. In different ways, different scriptures have tried to make people content with their way of life. No one is stopping us from making progress, but if we are stuck in some troublesome condition, then no one is asking us to fight. If we are in facing injustice, of course those who give justice have to do something for us, but we are not told to fight. So he says that, so Moses says there's a lovely mountain there. You're worried about rebellion and all. When we die, we'll go there and we'll eat all the food and we'll rest and it'll be wonderful. That is how the Christians describe heaven, and God will provide all our needs. There will be light, there will be joy and happiness, and of course naturally there won't be all this kind of work. So when we have a belief in heaven, some of us may take it easy. I don't need a big house, I have to go to heaven. I don't need a lot of money, I have to go to heaven. I don't need, I am not to stay here, I'm only passing through, so I will only do what I need to pass through. So it can, dampen or slow down our ambitions and our desires and activities, and some people may not like that. Their most faithful disciples were the two cart horses, Boxer and Clover. Cart, like not exactly a thela, but it will be a horse carriage with wooden sides in which you carry goods. So these two horses normally used to draw the cart. These two had great difficulty in thinking anything out for themselves. In understanding, what people were explaining. But having once accepted the pigs as their teachers, they absorbed everything that they were told and passed it on to the other animals by simple arguments. That is why he's calling them the best disciples. It took some time for them to understand. And once they understood, they explained and passed it on. Now, communism had its base among the peasants, the serfs, the factory workers. There were a large number of them. First, they, did not accept these new ideas. They were hardworking, just as those two horses were hardworking. The factory workers and the farm workers were hardworking. Okay, we'll work, we'll get our daily bread, and we go to sleep. That is why on festivals we have so many dishes that we are supposed to prepare, because earlier these dishes were never prepared on ordinary days. The ordinary laborer and worker did not have money to get all these, fantastic foods. But now, if we look at least at our pre-corona days, having chola or dahi bada, puri, these are not unusual, wonderful things that we wait for Diwali to have. It's a holiday, it's a birthday, it's a good day, and just we decide to have something like that. Isn't that so? So, the saying is that these workers took some time to understand the message of communism. But once they understood it, okay, we are going to be free, we are going to have more food and bigger houses and less work, and they were all excited to follow their communist leaders. In the same way, these two horses are described as having taken time to understand the message of communism, animalism, and then once they understood it, they explained it to others. They were unfailing in their attendance at the secret meetings in the barn and led the singing of the beasts of England, with which the meetings always ended. Now, as it turned out, the rebellion was achieved much earlier and more easily than anyone had expected. Now, underline this word rebellion. Now, this is a very important part of the story, how the animals rebelled against Jones, why exactly did they rebel in the way they did, and that always can be the subject of a long answer. So underline it, put a double tick on this paragraph that this part of the story you must learn and remember very well. It's about 2 pages. In past years, Mr. Jones, although a hard master, had been a capable farmer. But of late, he had fallen on evil days. Capable, able to do his work, and therefore effective, efficient, taking care of his animals. He had become much disheartened after losing money in a lawsuit. Now in India, we often call these cases law case. And we won't say law case, we'll say, oh, he lost a case in the courts. So lawsuit is a case in the courts. He had become disheartened. He had lost hope and courage. For whole days at a time, he would lounge in his Windsor chair in the kitchen, reading the newspapers, drinking and occasionally feeding Moses on crusts of bread soaked in beer. His men were idle and dishonest, the fields were full of weeds, the buildings wanted roofing, wanted is lacked, and hedges were neglected, and the animals were underfed. So because he didn't come out and see what was happening, his workers were lazy and dishonest. They didn't care for the animals, they didn't feed them, so the animals were already underfed. They got less food, and of course the whole building was dilapidated and everything was in a very bad condition. Now as it turned out, June came and the hay was almost ready for cutting. On Midsummer Eves, which was a Saturday, Mr. Jones went into Willingdon and got so drunk at the Red Lion. Now Red Lion is the name of a pub. We would call it a bar today. Pub was an old word, or a tavern where men in the village gathered to drink, that he did not come back till midday on Sunday. The men had milked the cows in the early morning and had gone out rabbiting without bothering to feed the animals. So Sunday morning, Jones he had come in, but he was so drunk that he came home and went to sleep. And his men had milked the cows, because the milk has to be sold or made into butter or whatever. But they had gone out catching rabbits without feeding them. When Mr. Jones got back, he immediately went to sleep in the drawing room sofa with the news of the world over his face. Now you find that phrase, news of the world, newspaper, on his face. So he didn't know anything about the world, but his face was covered by the paper called News of the World. At last, so that evening, when evening came, the animals were still unfed. At last they could stand it no longer. One of the cows broke in the door of the store shed with her horns, and all the animals began to help themselves from the bins. It It was just then that Mr. Jones woke up. The next moment he and his foremen were in the store shed with whips in their hands, lashing out in all directions. Now, normally when animals are whipped, they cower. But these animals had been learning about asserting themselves for the last 3 months, that men are exploiters and beaters and destroyers of our way of life and our peace and our food. So when Jones and his animals came out with their whips, this was more than the hungry animals could bear. Normally, no one has told us that we should not be scolded, हम लोग बहुत डांट खा लेते. But sometimes someone says, तुम्हें डांट क्यों खाना चाहिए? You have your rights. अच्छा, डांटा, and then we get upset. With one accord, though nothing of the kind had been planned beforehand, they flung themselves upon their tormentors. Jones and his men suddenly found themselves being butted and kicked from all sides. The situation was quite out of their control. They had never seen the animals behave like this before. And this sudden uprising is, rebellion. You can have a simpler spelling and a word revolt, R-E-V-O-L-T, of creatures whom they were used to thrashing and maltreating just as they chose, frightened them almost out of their wits. So as I just tried to explain to you, the animals had been angry and reading and studying and talking about their rights. So suddenly when they were hit and they were hungry, they just attacked. And one attacked and everyone joined them, and it was a terrible attack. Imagine cows and horses and sheep kicking at you. Humans, what can we do? And they were quite shocked. They had been used to hitting them and they would be out cowering and whimpering. But today they were attacking. After only a moment or two, they gave up trying to defend themselves and took to their heels. A minute later, all 5 of them were in full flight down the cart track that led to the main road, with the animals pursuing them in triumph. Victory. So they all began running to escape. And all the animals, the cows and the horses and the sheep and the goats, and the dogs, they all kept running. Imagine what a scene it would be. Mrs. Jones looked out of the bedroom window, saw what was happening, hurriedly flung a few possessions into a carpet bag and slipped out of the farm by another way. Moses sprang off his perch and flapped after her, croaking loudly. Meanwhile, the animals had chased Jones and his men out onto the road and slammed the 5-barred gate behind them. And so almost before they knew what was happening, the rebellion had been successfully carried through. Jones was expelled and the manor farm was theirs. So they were so happy. They didn't know. They had not planned it. They had only been studying and getting ready for it. And here when the opportunity came, they all drove their master and his workers away. And even Mrs. Jones saw what was happening. All the animals are chasing my husband. I better, do something. And she put some clothes in a carpet bag. A carpet bag is, just a kind of duffel bag or a bag made of some thick cloth material that would be there available before, when synthetics were not invented. And she took some shortcut out of the farm because all the animals were at the gate. And before they knew it, they had been Major talked about the rebellion. They had been reading and planning about it, or at least preparing themselves to think about it. And here, Mr. Jones had been thrown out of the farm, and now only they were left in ownership of this. So, of course, there's a little bit more to show how they celebrated, but I'd like to stop here and continue tomorrow. Thank you.